Hello ladies! This is a little different video, but I thought I'm gonna tell you, in case you care, how it was growing up in Berlin. I'm born in Berlin, I grew up there, spent most of my life in Berlin, and as you maybe know, Berlin was divided. There was literally a wall going through the city. And in case you also don't know, it's been 28 years that the wall came down. Because, you know, if you don't have a lot to do with Germany, and you might have that in the back of your head, but are you aware it's been already 28 years? Crazy. I was 13 years old when the wall came down, so old enough to really realize what happened around me. And I was very involved in this whole story because this is crazy, but I have seen most of my family, everybody except of my father, my mother and my sister, after the wall came down. I was not allowed to travel to the east side. And I mean, can you just imagine how that is to see your own family, my grandparents, my uncles, aunts, my cousins? I saw all of them for the very first time when I was already 13. Totally crazy. And I want to explain this a little bit to you because I believe not everybody knows that, especially if you grew up in America. The crazy thing is that Germany was already divided since the end of the 40s, so West and East Germany did already exist since then. And a little, I don't want to go too deep into this, but why it all happened is because after the Second World War, Germany needed obviously help. You know, everything was destroyed, they needed help, and then the Allies came from other countries. One side of Germany got basically occupied by the French, the British and the Americans, but then on the other side, the east side, half of Germany got occupied by the Soviets. And that is the problem. That is why there was such a difference between the east and the west side. And when they started to divide that, there were so many people that tried to escape, that kind of understood, hey, something is going on, and try to escape. But those that stayed on the east side, that part turned into, you know, communism and all that stuff because of the Soviets. So it was kind of bad luck and kind of good luck for the people who were on the side that were occupied by the French, the Americans and the British. But then the next crazy thing is Berlin was a city where it was still very easy for Germans from the east side to escape, and so 10 years later in 1961 the Soviet side decided to build a wall. And I have seen crazy pictures, I don't know if you have ever seen that, but during building that wall people tried to jump over the fence, risk their life, you know, to escape that. So the crazy part is, if you see Germany and then there is Berlin in the middle of the east side, and Berlin again got divided, and the same thing happened, like a mini model of what happened in Germany. Again, the west side occupied by the French, the British and the Americans, the east side occupied by the Soviet Union. Right where I live, there was so many Americans stationed during that time. So I always had friends that were American. They were all stationed there, had their homes, whole areas in Berlin were full of Americans. And what I enjoyed as a child was they had their own little malls, which we weren't allowed to shop in there, the PX. But you know, if you would flirt with an American young dude and ask for some Levi's jeans, then they would get that for you. I mean, you would still have to pay for it, but it was just so ridiculous cheap compared to German stores. So I remember we had to pay back then around 160 D-Mark for a Levi's. Levi's was huge back then at the end of the 80s, and the Americans paid only $20 to $30. So yeah, that was a cheap way to get those American brands. And yeah, I have vivid memories of when we tried to see something of the world and traveling. We always had to drive through the east part, and I tell you that border control was, for me as a child, I thought that was scary. You know, they wore their uniforms and they looked super strict at you and your passport, and I always thought like this is a scary situation, and we children were always told, you know, be quiet, don't talk, be nice. And so it was a weird situation, and I always thought that's strange, and I'm so scared to drive through that part. So for me it was very normal to actually see the Berlin Wall during my childhood, because my mother, she worked at the Checkpoint Charlie Museum, which is a museum on the west side that really showed many things of like a hot balloon or a car, stuff like that, little movies, how people from the east side try to escape from there. So some families did crazy stuff, like I said, with the hot balloon. I mean, can you imagine? So yeah, this family that escaped with a hot balloon, for many months they collected fabric, because it wasn't easy, you know, in East Germany to just go in store and say, hey, I want, you know, I don't know how many tons of fabric. So she sewed this hot balloon together in her basement with a little sewing machine, and then they had to get, you know, this basket they did themselves, and then they had to buy the gas. And then in the middle of the night, this whole family, I believe it was father, mother and 2 children, they flew in a hot balloon over the Berlin Wall to escape. I mean, how crazy is that? Or the other story, how people would hide in the trunk of usually people from the west that were visiting, so they try to escape with them and driving into the west. But you know, if they would have found them, they would have landed in prison. So this was a really dangerous thing. So anyhow, because my mother worked in this museum, and that museum is literally stationed right where the Berlin Wall was. Today they ripped it all off, it's not there anymore. And what's really interesting is that if you have never been there back when the wall existed, on the west side it was always full with graffiti, and you know, there was no police or anything taking care of it. Nobody cared, the wall was just there, what could you do? And we could risk-free basically look on the east side. But then on the east side there was a different story. On the east side, first of all, the Berlin Wall was clean as it can be, white, nobody was allowed to touch it, draw on it, come near to it. And then there was literally watchtowers and snipers, and they were positioned there in case somebody from the east tries to escape. That was not possible, they would shoot you to death. So we on the west side could watch all this, and I mean, we would make our little jokes and stuff, we wouldn't take it so serious, because the serious part was if you were on the other side of the wall. So those people were not even allowed to just, you know, stare at the wall or anything like that. So that would be suspicious, you shouldn't do that, you would land in prison. there were also mines on the border strip of the east side. So really you can't walk on there. If you were living on the east side, it was dangerous. And I also remember vividly when the wall came down. That was a very crazy time. The city was full of people, packed, because everybody wanted to see it. You know, the people from East Berlin came over. People from East Germany could go through the Berlin Wall. It was like literally the border is destroyed once this wall is gone. It's like everybody can go wherever they want. Everybody is free. So I remember I came many times too late to school because school was still happening. It's not, you know, that the government said, okay, Berlin Wall came down, there's no more school. No, life has to go on. And I had to drive the subway. And the subway was so packed with people. It was so crazy. And the other thing what happened is that people would go to the Berlin Wall and rip off pieces. I did, friends of me did, you know, to have a souvenir, basically a free souvenir of the Berlin Wall. I don't know what I did with my pieces, but I had lots of chunks that I ripped off, and they looked, of course, especially cool when you took them from the west side because they were full of graffiti. And then later, people started even to selling those pieces of the wall. I'm sure if somebody still has original piece of the wall, they could get a chunk of money because who still has it? Yeah, crazy things happened, and then the government decided to give 100 D-Mark, back then it was still D-Mark, to everybody from the east side. And so that also caused a little bit of different opinions. Some people didn't like that, like why do they get free money? And then, you know, it started also that some people would stand twice or 3 times in line to get even more, to get like 300, because it wasn't really controlled very well. And then also, sometimes I thought for myself, it's like, hey, you poor East German, here's some money, go and get yourself some nice things. You know, it seemed a little bit like looking down on them. So people were very torn about that. And another thing that I want to mention, because I'm in the special position that I know how people felt from the west side, because I am born in West Berlin, but all my family is from the east, so I know how they felt first experience. And it isn't as simple as you think. It's not, hey, the Berlin Wall came down, we are no longer, you know, occupied by the Soviets. It isn't as simple if you are born into that system. That is the only thing you know. And it is not that everybody who lived in East Germany was aware that maybe something is wrong about the system. It's not like that. Because when you grow into communism and that stuff, then this is the only truth you know. You are not allowed to watch TV, but you also don't know that this is normal. You don't know. So if you don't have any chance of knowing what is normal, this is your reality. And so I know firsthand it was very complicated for people from East Germany, and not as simple as you think, like, wow, we're free, yay. It's not like that. And many problems occurred. For example, some of my relatives were teachers. All of a sudden, West Germany said, hey, your teacher job is not worth much because all you teach is wrong. So basically, all you ever did your whole life is all of a sudden wrong. So that was not easy. And also, you know, I'm the last to say communism is good. Of course it's not. It has never worked out. It will never work out. But there is one thing which East German people didn't know. There is no such thing as unemployment. And that is something they had to learn, a tough lesson. All of a sudden their jobs were not worth anything. This is not how, you know, an economic system works in West Germany. And there you go. Sorry, you can't be teacher anymore. Sorry, you can't work this or that anymore, because all these jobs, they're worth nothing in a free economic system. So yeah, it was tough on East Germans, and I hope, and I can't tell that the generation today, which it's funny, the wall existed for 28 years and now it's 28 years later after the wall came down. Today it's kind of funny because the east side will look much more elegant actually than the west side, because for 28 years now money was pumped into this side where wasn't much done in a long time. So if you ever visit Berlin, you will be surprised that what used to be east looks actually much nicer now than the west. Yeah, this was a little bit a different video. I thought maybe it's interesting for some of you. I think it's all crazy what happened there. And yeah, I thought I'd tell my little story. And then I wish you a lovely day. Bye bye. Auf Wiedersehen.